much, and we're back together again. All right. So, you guys good to go? All right. Jim, thank you so much.
The big green button is for going forward. I got that. Good. So what I've been focusing on for the last few years is this idea around leadership for flourishing. It's a title we're using. And trying to find in these groups that I'll describe around the world, is it true that everywhere we don't know what we're doing? And is it true that everywhere things are really awful? And if we read the news, that's what it seems like. Everything is awful everywhere. Or is it possible that there are people that are figuring stuff out? And part of the challenge might be, how do you find those people? And how do you learn with them and from them? Because a lot of the folks that I'll describe in the next while that are able to do this, they don't actually know that this is what they're doing. They say, this is just sort of the way we work. You know, our community works well, so Jackson's a pretty amazing place. But, you know, we run a town council. Or we run a sock company. So many of you probably heard like the company Thorlo Socks. You know, so I've worked with them for a long time. And they make socks. I said, so, but what you're doing is really amazing. What are you doing? We make socks. It's just the way that we do things. So the question that we started asking is, in flourishing, what does flourishing look like? And what does leadership for flourishing look like? And can we start to say, look, there are examples of what's happening. There is a way to know how we can do this. And what are the questions that we're bringing to this? So what I want to share in the next while are 4 things. 1, that it's possible, that we can do this. The second is, what does it start to look like? How do you measure this and know if you're doing it? And what are groups learning? And how can we learn with other groups that are learning the kinds of things we want to? And then what is some of the evidence that we've found and the lots and lots of surveys we've done in lots and lots of places to start saying, you know, what is the evidence showing us for what it is that leads to greater flourishing, and how can leadership support that? And then we're going to have a real treat to start to end the evening, is 2 people from your community that live here that are doing really amazing things. So these aren't just people I'm going to talk that live in Massachusetts or live in South Africa or Mexico, you know, very far away places. Rather, they live here. And they're people that we're going to share a little bit about their story and what they're learning about how to do this. And there'll be references for you. So good. So the first thing we want to start with, and just the timing's not working on the thing. So, yeah. So the main point, oh, there it is. Okay, good. The main point, it is possible to serve all the stakeholders in your community. It is possible for them to fully engage all of their creative energies in doing what you're trying to do, and all the things that they're bringing that are available to you. So people show up in your organization, in your community, and they bring things. They know how to do things. And they're creative and they're curious and they want to contribute. It is possible to take all of that and do something really magical. If you'd see me looking over here, I'm trying to look at the screen so I don't look behind me. But it's set up for somebody who's at a podium, and I'm a walker, so we have to. So what we're going to play with, it's time to say yes. So I'm going to make a distinction during the conversation or the exploration of the difference between a yes and a no. And the reason and I'll share a little bit why we're doing that. Because what we're going to start try to connect the dots in leadership for flourishing is, in your own body, in your own experience, you know whether this is working or not. You know when you show up in any given moment, whether you're in an awful meeting. How many of you in the last year have been in an awful meeting? Or an awful engagement? It doesn't have to be a meeting at work. Because some people will say, you haven't been with my family, my in-laws, right? Or my friends, or that place. But the point is, from the moment that we're there, we're like, I know this isn't working. There's something not right here. And we know that in ourselves. But we can also start to look at diagnostics or looking at the organization, the community. What is happening in our interactions that's driving that? What do we actually want out of this? And how are our interactions actually influencing that? So we can start to connect those dots to say, maybe if we knew what we wanted, and we know what others want, and we knew how our interactions affected that, maybe we could start putting that together. And maybe there are a lot of people on the planet that are figuring this out. So my conservative estimates today, meaning I'm trying to be really on the low side, is that tens of millions of people have lived for the last 30 to 40 years in communities that we have found that do this every day. And the problem is that most of them don't know that that's what they're doing. They think that's just normal. I said, no, everybody's pretty engaged here, and we get great results. Right? So maybe it's possible to do this, and we can find and learn with them. So I want to share with you, it is possible. It is possible to say, I can live into what feels like a yes. I like being here. Because I asked you, how many of you have experienced an awful gathering, an awful time? You said, this was a complete waste of my time. I should not have been here. I'm actually stupider, less passionate, less engaged than I was when I started with you half an hour ago, an hour ago. How many of you have ever had that experience in the last year? So the flip side of that is, how many of you have had the experience, I'm actually better because I'm with you. I actually feel stronger, better. I'm actually having a great time. I know more because I was with you. I'm more passionate, engaged. My heart's more involved. We're going to hear about that tomorrow. Because I was with you, I actually have more desire to go do something because of you. And it's something that I love doing. And you've had that experience also. Right? So the point is that both of those are possible. That makes sense? So it's a really simple idea, I think, to say, wait a second, why do we, so I'm going to ask you, do you have a preference for that one that was this energy sucking that you have to, I think of this, I have to go medicate myself after being with you. Whether it's going for a walk, and today I had the fortune to get to go across the footbridge and then up and down the Snake. So I might have seen a couple of you down on the Snake River. I met a lot of people with a lot of dogs today. It was amazing. But I went up a couple miles and a couple miles back, so I got to do that and see all the people running the marathon. That was kind of fun too. But the point is, he said, do we have a preference between that one that sucks all the energy out of us versus the one that we're better with, that we feel better with, that we enjoyed? And the question is, do you have a preference? So that's a real question for you to think about for a second. Do you have a preference? Thank you. And the question is, therefore, before you tell me what your preference is, what percentage of your day, your life, do you spend in that no versus you spend in the yes? So think about it. You don't have to tell anybody else that number, but to start thinking, what percentage of my life do I spend there? Now, this is a group of people who were dedicated to a Teton Leadership Center Conference Summit, coming and saying, how are we going to dig deeper and wider in our community? So your numbers are probably skewed towards a lot more of the yes and a lot less of the no. But then think about the people in your communities that you work with, who are working in your organizations that you're serving, and what percentage of their life is in that one versus the other. And the question there is, if the number is greater than 0, why do we spend any time in the no? And what we start to find when we ask this question, and again, we've asked this question through our survey, which I'll share a little bit later, in 126 countries, 164,000 groups have been described using our survey. We've done work like this in 59 different countries now and across the United States as well. I said, why do you do that? And they said, well, because I have to, don't I? And that gets to the crux of this. He said, if you have to accept the no, because that's just the way it is, because it's work, because I don't have any choice, if that's true, my contention is then it's true always. Right? It's a law of physics that it just has to be awful. It has to be disengaging, disheartening, dispassionating, all that stuff. But if we have this other experience, and we experience it quite frequently, then it's not true that it has to always be no. A lot of times it's also yes. So then that brings us into the question of what Sandy shared is agreements. Why have we agreed to interact with each other in a way that drives this no versus we've agreed to interact in a way that drives the yes? And we experience both of them, so they're both real. And what we want to start playing with now, and I'm going to share as a framework that we've started developing in the last few years, of can we tell where we do this better? How do we know if people are better off because they're interacting with me? So that's going to be our first piece. We call it total value generated is everybody that's interacting with me in some ecosystem, so whether it's my business, my family, but something in those interactions, in that group, are we better off because we're interacting with each other? Or are some of you worse off because you interact with my company or with my group or whatever what we're doing? He said, so are you better off or worse off? That makes sense? So the question becomes, can we see if we're better off or worse off? And what we're going to suggest is it's possible to demonstrate that everybody could be better off. And we found a lot of these examples where everybody that's interacting with us, we'll call those stakeholders or people that engage with us, but they can all be better off than they are before interacting with us. And if they hate interacting with us, then they'll go interact with somebody else. I said, but if you're going to interact with me, you'll actually be better off because of that. Does that seem shocking that you say, you'll actually be better if you engage with me? It's going to lead us to some surprising things which are kind of fun. So why total value generated? This is a framework we're using. That's a book. It's available out there that describes a lot of the details of this. And actually the impetus, if you don't like the book, the fault resides with Sandy because she was the one that told me, you have to write the book. Because I know it's very philosophical, and I said, but you got to have that so at least people have, he said, oh, I have the book. I'm not going to read it, but I have the book. So we wrote the book, Ecosynomics. And ecosynomics just means, ecosynomics is the rules of relationship together, or the principles of collaboration. So if we unite the creative energies towards a deeper purpose, so everybody that's come together to work with us, if we could actually figure out how to bring those together and do something creative, then we could achieve this other purpose that we're going to be looking at, and we'll be talking about purpose tomorrow. It is possible to generate a flourishing ecosystem, and what is an ecosystem? We're going to look at that in a second. But what do we mean by that? But it is possible to generate that for today and tomorrow. And we have lots of examples where that works, and you have a lot of examples where that works sometimes and could work better. So what are we going to do about that? It also allows you to start shifting to your necessary narrative. One of the things I've been working a lot on recently is the challenge that a lot of leaders say. He said, I have 2 or 3 narratives I have to work with. One is, for example, in a business, I'm working with a large microfinance bank I'll share a little bit about in Latin America. And they said, it's very clear to show whether we're making money or not. So everybody that does microfinance measures what is the default rate, how many dollars or pesos are out there, how many come back, and what's the default rate. So everybody measures that. And he said, and we can show what we charge in interest and default rates and those things. So we're very good at that. We're very good at knowing a lot of the what we call administrative data or productivity indicators, right? So how many people are doing, how many new people are coming in, how many people are leaving. We do all that really well. He said, but the reason we do this, and this is what I'm hearing over and over again, I have multiple stories. I have this story. We do that really well. But the reason we do it is to empower these very poor women at the very low end of the spectrum, the economic spectrum, so that they have access to their dreams. So, and if you get to meet them, you believe that. They said, we actually really, really care about that. We've been doing this for 35 years. We're really, really good at this. They now have 4 million customers, and I've interviewed a bunch and surveyed a bunch of them over the last 3 years, and I believe that that's what they're really trying to do. But the chairman says, but I have 2 stories. I have an anecdotal story about what we really do and why we really care about this stuff. And I've got an analytical, auditable story about the productivity and the results that we get. And they're 2 different stories. He said, and push comes to shove, the investors are pushing harder and harder, digitization within the banking and microfinance. He said, all that stuff is starting to say, all that nice stuff, put that in a YouTube video, give them a link, and don't ever go visit anybody, because it's expensive. Do this other thing. So he said, the problem is I have 2 narratives. Can we get to one? So this is one of those questions, like the Teton Leadership Center said, is can we start to say, it's not 2 stories. It's 1 story. It's who we are, and the way we are, and who we are, and what we do, the how we do what we do, is why we get the impact that we get. So I'm going to tell you a little bit more story about that, how to develop that, how to measure that, what we're finding. And then you're going to get to hear a couple stories about how they're doing that here. And then tomorrow, I've already been really excited asking the questions of some of the other speakers and how they see that. And then with Matthew asking, and then how do you hold that? How did you hold that at Ben & Jerry's, right? Can you hold that one story, right? And so what happens when you can? So focusing leadership on flourishing. What I want to show you now is this is my timer to help me, is how do we start thinking about who's involved? And what do we mean by an ecosystem of stakeholders? To say, who is it that's involved or engaged in what you're doing? And so we've come up with this idea, we call it E cubed. Some people like it, so we've been playing with that. But the E cubed is a very simple idea of E1, E2, E3. E1 is everyone, bless you. Everyone, everywhere, that's E2, every day, E3. So whatever I've set up my group to do, whether it's fellowship with my friends, whether it's my company, whether it's me as a teacher, I'm also a professor, so me teaching, said, I have a goal for who I'm supposed to be serving. And I'll give you this example briefly. There's a lot more written about it in some of the citations. So when you get access to the slides, on all the bottom, I give you articles that you can go read where we've talked about all of this. But the idea, if you're interested, but the idea is, he said, okay, Massachusetts, one of those projects that Sandy mentioned I've been working on, is the state of Massachusetts K through 12 public education system. So I'm going to ask you a question. It's public education. So I'm giving you the key, right? It's public education. So how many people, who is this intended for? That's a question for you. So who is public education intended for in the state? Everyone, right? It's public. It's for the people. It's for all the citizens of the state. They can make other choices, but it's for everyone. So they asked me to come in because they started looking at, they being the whole system, the commissioners, the parents, the teachers' unions, the poor, the rich, all the folks started saying, it's not working. In the Massachusetts, we're supposed to be one of the leading states in the country on all kinds of indicators. 52% of the kids taking our state exam, called the MCAS, 52% score proficient or better is a technical term, meaning 52% pass the exam. So what does 52% passing the exam mean also? 48% aren't passing. So then Jim asked his innocent, stupid little questions like, so how much time did they put in there? Because my kids went through the system. He said, so that's like 17,000 hours your kid is in K through 12. I said, well, how much does the state spend on this? And in Massachusetts, it's $185,000 are spent on the kid being in school K through 12. I said, so, and did you give like the worst hours of the day of your kid? He said, you get my kid from like 9 o'clock at night to 1 in the morning when they're tired and just in bad spirits. No, that's when I get them. You get them from 8 or 9 o'clock in the morning to 3. Those are their best hours of the day. Right? So does this make sense? So he said, okay, what did you do with what we had? And so if only half of the kids are graduating proficient on the state exam that you're pushing for 13 years and 17,000 hours, then we're not doing so well. So we E1, E2, E3. So half of the kids are getting some benefit out of it. So half of them. But then everybody that tells you the statistics says, yeah, but we can tell you the zip codes where it's not working. So it's a social, economic, racial issue also. I said, okay. So then it's not everywhere, and by everywhere we mean with all the different social demographics that exist, right? He said, well, it works for kids that have this certain kind of middle, upper class, white perspective, then it kind of works for them sometimes, but it doesn't work for a lot of the other folks. So that's the everywhere. So in everywhere, we're at best half. And then every day, does it work for the kids? And he said, well, of the 8 hours that they're there, like 3 or 4 hours, they're actually in getting some good instruction for the ones that it works for. And the rest of the time is like daycare. They're just keeping them busy doing stuff so they're not out on the streets bothering us. Right? He said, so if it's everywhere, everyone, everywhere, every day, the question is, how well is that working? So if it's public, it's for everybody. But it's not working for everybody that's in the system everywhere. Right? So then our score is actually low. So the point then is we can start to say, well, who are these stakeholders or who is this ecosystem? Well, who's the everybody that your statement of purpose says you're here to serve? So when we saw that was 52%, I asked the people in the room, so again, they're the leaders of the whole system, I said, what does a good number look like? He said, I'm agnostic to this. My kids have already graduated. He said, and it's your system. I'm not leading this system. What number should we go towards? And they're like, well, 52%, because we have a lot of resources, because we're well-educated, because we're one of the best states in the country, and we got to 52%, maybe 70%. And they're like going, yeah, 70%, maybe, yeah, but we've never gotten there. I said, good, so let's just write in the minutes 70%. Fine, that's our goal. And we're going to write down what 30% don't get that. We're just going to write it down. I said, you know, we're still going to spend $185,000 on you. You're still going to spend 17,000 hours of your best hours of your day for 13 years, but you're not going to get anything out of this. Sorry. And as I said that, all of these educators, like, well, we can't do that. I said, why? Because I'm putting in the minutes and it's public? I said, partially. But they actually, and this is our bigger point for Flourishing, they actually, everybody, and I believe that they actually care about these kids. Right? That's why I'm in this part of the system. That's why I'm the dean of the School of Education at Boston University, Colin Harding, who I've written this with. This is why I'm the commissioner for the state. I actually care about this stuff. I said, then what's your number? I said, it's public. They said, he said, so it has to be everybody. And that becomes the biggest challenge. He said, it's 52%. We can't even see how to get to 70%, and it has to be 100%. So we have to figure this out. And the question is, do we have the smarts to be able to do this? So how do we start measuring how well people are? And so in the Flourishing, we're calling this ecosystem-wide flourishing right now for a nice technical term for academics publishing on this stuff. But the idea that we're using is, for the business folks, he said, okay, I can measure value. I can understand the conversation of value. He said, are you experiencing more value in your life? I said, good. So what we know how to do is to measure objective value. We can put it in economic terms, we can put it in efficiency terms, we can put it in productivity terms. We know how to measure how well you're doing what you say you're doing, and the financial parts of that, as Jonathan was mentioning. He said, but we've also spent a lot of time in the last few decades, and a lot of my colleagues, getting really good at subjective measures of asking people and knowing whether they're giving us good indicators of, and measures or responses of, do you actually care about this stuff? What do you care about, and does it make a difference in your life? So here's a shocking, shocking idea that this little graphic, I hope, makes very simple and easy, or obvious, is to know whether, for example, my customers, or my clients in this case at the bank, are better off. Well, I can know if we're making more money for them. I can know if they have more resilience and stability in their life and able to make better investments and stronger results. Or, household, their kids are better educated, those things. I could know that. Those things seem knowable. And I could ask them, what do you care about? What are your values? What are the things that are important to you? And I could ask them those things. And then I could say, okay, if that's what you care about, then how are we doing? Does that seem impossible to ask? I said, well, what do you care about? Well, I care about my daughter being able to go to school and not being carrying water. I care about, that it's safe to live where we do. I care that we have a hardwood floor versus a dirt floor. So I said, good, just tell me what you care about, and then how well are we doing? Does that seem pretty obvious? We don't do that. Like in this case, we don't know what our customers want because we tell our customers, we tell each other what we think our customers should want. Right? And I find that, and I work a lot with NGOs and government too, and these global networks, and he said, we tend to do that versus saying, well, who is a stakeholder? And then can we actually go ask them? It's like what Jonathan's trying to do. Could we actually go ask them, what do you care about and how are we doing? Because then the basic question starts to be, so what I have up here, is that a pointer? No. What we start to do is to say for like our clients, the direct or indirect, so the indirect is more of the values, and the direct in their case was the financial stability. He said, well, we can know how well you're doing, and we can measure how well you're doing according to what you value and what you respond. That makes sense? So that's pretty obvious. But the question then becomes, compared to what? Because what I started with you was, are you better because you're interacting with me? And that turns out to be this other really critical little piece that we find in groups that are doing this very well versus all the rest of us. And I'll tell you, as a business, I teach in the business school. Right now I'm teaching at Boston College. I teach in the MBA program and undergraduate business program. courses on responsible leadership, managing change, strategy, those kinds of things. But I've taught it in many places around the world. But we don't teach them to actually go out and ask, are you better off because you're interacting with me? It's not in our formulas. So I know that if I give you some money, this keeps going off so I can't see. I know that if I give you some money, for example, I give you a $100 loan, I know you have more than you had than zero. Because I gave you $100, and so you have more than $0 I would have given you. So you're better off. I say, yeah, but let's compare it to where they would have been if they'd interacted with somebody else. Right, so you're not better than zero, which would be at the center of this graphic. Rather, what is your baseline? So that circle. He said, if you're interacting with somebody else or not me, what does your baseline look like? So how are you now? So that I can say, if you're outside of that, if you're in the green, like in this graphic, then according to your values, then you are living, because of the interaction with me, you're experiencing more value in your experience and your outcomes than if you weren't interacting with me. That makes sense? And then what I didn't have in this graphic, but is if it's in red, and it said, I'm actually worse off on that interaction because I'm with you. It's the interest rates and stuff. So you're taking money from me, or joy of life from me, and giving it to somebody else. That make sense? So if we go back to that question I asked you before, if you've ever had that experience of life-sucking, hating being where you were, you have to go medicate yourself afterwards with a walk, a coffee, a beer, something, but not be with you people, then that's an experience we have of, they just took something from me and I'm worse off because of that. That makes sense? So what we're starting to measure is, are you worse off or better off because of these interactions? And how do we know, based on what they each say, if we're better or worse off? So the collaborators, or what they call their employees, are they better off? Not because they get paid anything, not because they make $17 an hour, but they're making more than they could if they were working somewhere else in the neighborhood with their skill set. So how are we doing compared to other interactions? So we're shifting the benchmark. What we can then start to do, in doing that, we're starting to know, how are we measuring this? So in the Harvard Flourishing Initiative, we've come up with this, my colleagues have come up with this very basic idea. They said, people measure stuff all the time, right? In flourishing or well-being, happiness, economic well-being, all kinds of things. We measure a lot of those things. We said, can we agree to at least measure 4 things? We never measure, in this case it was in epidemiological studies, but we never measure 4 things. He said, you are a physical human being. We agree on that. You have social relationships. We agree on that. You have mental capacities. We agree on that. And you have either spiritual or moral or values or criteria part of you also. Can we at least agree to those 4 things? So that anything that we're measuring at least all 4 of those things. And can we do that robustly? So the idea started to become, how could we do that? And looking at all 4 dimensions of them at the same time. What you find most studies and most groups doing, they're measuring one of those things or a part of one of those things and not all 4. So it's not complete, but it's a start. To say flourishing human being is doing well on all 4 of those things, at least. Good. So then I started to say, let's look at what we're doing, because it's leadership for flourishing as an organization. How well are we doing across those 4 elements? So the 4 are the physical, social, mental, and spiritual. So for that stakeholder, for that person, whether they're clients, investors, the recipients, our employees, other people in our community, how well are they doing? So we call that health. What is their current state of health in those? Are they doing okay or not? And that's part of what Jonathan was starting to point out. How well are we actually doing in these things? And the second part is, what are the regenerative capacities that we have, the capacities we have to go generate this again? He said, are we completely dependent on others for our physical, mental, social, or spiritual, or moral health? Or do we have the capacities, we've learned to develop these ourselves so that we can continue to do this? So we call that regenerative capacities. So we combine these 2 things to call it regenerative health. So we can, in each one of these groups, and each one of those measures on the previous slide, start to say, do you have the capacities to do this, or have I extracted those from you, and you actually are worse off because you're here, or are you better off because you're here across these 4 dimensions? And do you have the capacity to see into the outcomes are your capacities you already bring, so everything that's in your CV, the capacities you already have today, the things from the past, we call them the nouns in your life. But the verbs or the development is the development of new capacities and relationships. So do you also have the capacity, like what we're doing in the Teton Leadership Center and CWC and other groups here, is we're developing your capacities. I'm assuming a lot of the nonprofit work is developing the capacities to continue to strengthen your ability to do this. But also potential, living into your dreams, into the possibilities that you see. You have that capacity in knowing in yourself that I have been seen. So a lot of microfinance is about, I've been seen for what I bring and can engage in my life, and I can start to determine for myself what my dreams look like. And can I step into those? So we're going to measure all that stuff, and we know how to measure these things. So let's go measure that for each one of them. Now I want to give you a brief thing, and then we're going to do little exercises. So this is some weird idea that Jim's got, and he's got a little research group that thinks about it. This is a list of the groups that are using this right now. So it's not a couple people, it's not a couple of kinds of organizations, but it's from Waldorf schools near my neighborhood. It's the World Green Building Council that certifies all the LEED buildings globally. The Twente region is the eastern part of the Netherlands. 60,000 organizations. They have a new system of universities where the community charters what the university does. And they said, we want to be a purpose-driven community in the next 20 years. Can you support us in getting there? Focus all your programs. So they've just created a program, they call it a living lab for human flourishing, taking up my work and our work and starting to say across all of those with all of their students. But my point is there's a whole bunch of groups, some of which you'll recognize. Even some earlier work we did with the town of Vail, back when Bob McLaurin was town manager there. But so people are taking it up, and just out of curiosity, group people that I'm presenting to or working with just in this next week. So today's Saturday. On Tuesday, I'm presenting this to the Harvard-Oxford initiative. So people from very different school systems are starting to say, what are we learning about this from a more robust, rigorous kind of thing? But we're also presenting to, BIVA is the Mexican Stock Exchange. And the Mexican Stock Exchange 2 years ago was asked by some of the major investors and companies, so they're Amazons and the big companies that they're, said, could you start to certify our chief sustainability officers? Chief sustainability officers in the C-suite is a relatively new thing for most companies. If they have one, it's in the last 5 years. They said, so we know what CFOs are certified by, our CPAs, there are all kinds of certifications, but for this CSO thing, it's brand new. Could you certify it? So they went to a colleague of mine named Hernando and said, would you in social values help us develop that program to offer within the stock exchange? And he said, yes, but only if we can use Jim's Human Flourishing or Leadership for Flourishing framework. So we just started this week our 4th cohort of 150 CSOs. So I got 500 that are going through, and I'll be speaking with them about this on Tuesday. So my point there is that people are starting to take this kind of stuff serious. Right? He said, can we ask these kinds of questions? We also just got passed, and I'm excited about this, all you're familiar with the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals of the UN? So we're halfway through that. Part of the question in the UN now is what's next? What comes after that? Because you got to start that process soon. So we have proposed the Global Flourishing Goals. And I was asked last May, a year ago, could we propose that by a guy? I said, I have zero idea how the UN works, zero, and zero desire to go learn how the UN works. I'm completely incompetent. I don't run myself. He said, but I'm not. I said, well, who are you? My name's Raja. What do you do? He said, I'm in the peacekeeping unit of the UN. And right now he's the UN's representative to Iran, right? And he's over there right now. So he says, I know how to do this, and I have some colleagues that could help us do this. Let's get a proposal in for what flourishing looks like on a global basis, on a massively local basis globally. And we said, but who's going to ever listen to us? So we came up with a technical document by September of last year, so a year ago. And I said, well, yay, we have a technical document. We can say we have a technical document, and yay. And he came back in October to our next monthly Zoom meeting, and he said, oh, I got a sponsor. Cool, what does that mean? He said, UNESCO is going to launch our goals as the proposal, in May. So this past May, you can find it online in India. In Mysore, the UNESCO, thank you, launched, proposed to the world that this is a way to look at things, right? And we're now in the process of getting, and it turns out to be easy if you know the guy Ramu, who was the script writer for the Secretary General, and Raja and Anantha, who ran this center, the Mahatma Gandhi Institute for Education, a UNESCO school in India. They're going to get the global human flourishing, the International Day for Human Flourishing. And it turns out you only have to get one country to propose it, and if you can propose it with a little technical document, which we wrote, then you can get all of civil society to start saying, this is actually an important thing to do. So I had no idea, but this is an example, but a guy in our group said, well, I could do that. That's really cool. What do I need to do to support you in doing that? So my point of all that is there are a lot of folks that are starting to say, we can do this, so you're not alone. So now I'm going to ask you to do a little exercise. And I'm going to use Mr. Rogers. And the reason is because a colleague of mine, Matthew Lee, who gives a lot of public talks on flourishing, in his talks, he includes two people when he starts talking about this stuff, me and Mr. Rogers. That's kind of cool. I get to be in the talk right next to Mr. Rogers. And so Mr. Rogers in the movie, if you saw Tom Hanks do it, he's sitting in a diner with this reporter who's really struggling. And he says, I want to ask you a simple question. Who has loved you into being? He said, I'll give you a minute, and I'll keep the timer. So I invite you to think about that for yourself for the next minute, and I'll keep the timer. To start anything, who has loved you into being? And I'll give you a minute. Thank you. So you can see you can continue to do that exercise whenever you want. But you exist, you're here. For some of you, the number might be small. For some of you, it might be a very large number. But who has loved you into being? Now, I'm going to ask you to then take a few seconds and imagine, see if you can see the circle of them. Of those people that you've listed that loved you into being, because they were hard on you, kind to you, whatever it was your criteria. But see the circle of those people that have been guiding you or loving you into being, with their guiding purpose being of loving you into being. So see if you can see that circle. I'll give you 30 seconds. Thank you. So now, if a guiding purpose, a guiding reason, and their co-leadership of flourishing was loving you into being, and whether they know each other or not, this circle of people have gathered together, and part of what they do is loving you into being, we can then say thank you. So a couple seconds of gratitude for the unique contributions that they've made to loving you into being, to that guiding purpose of loving you into being. So let's take another 30 seconds to thank them for their unique contributions to that guiding purpose. Thank you. So we've already started to define, according to me, what was flourishing. According to me and others who were in interactions with me, what does flourishing look like? Based on whose criteria? Who was able to and willing to make a unique contribution to that purpose of flourishing in interaction or not with others towards this purpose? I happened to be the purpose that time. Those people, in their unique ways, have contributed to my being and to loving me into being. And what gets fun if you start asking others in a break or other time or do this with others is we start unpacking that for ourselves. It's not always the people that were nicest to me. Oh yeah, they gave me a house. I said, yeah, they don't really love me into being. It was a loan because the return and the expected return was very high. But this other person who's sort of my nemesis in life has been really critical, or this mentor that was really hard. So as you start to unpack that with others, you said, what does that mean? But these people have made unique contributions. So what are the initial findings we have? And then we're going to get to hear two very specific ones with Nona and Fred here in town. But what we're starting to find, and so a couple of our methods like Jonathan shared, level of analysis from very macro to very micro. So macro meaning we're sort of looking at national characteristics or global. Right now, or meso is sort of organizational level, or micro is individuals. So the way we're doing this and what I'm going to share with you right now is mostly organizational and individual, meso and micro. The survey, which is free and available online, the link is there at IS Clarity, or the Institute for Strategic Clarity. You can take it for free. It's been used for now. 164,000 groups have been described in their experiences on where are you on this continuum. What is your experience and how much better off you are because you're interacting with these people? Am I better off in my experience with myself? Am I supported more in being seen by you and appreciated, or doing that for you? Does the group understand what my contributions are? What is our creative process and the source of creativity? So we got a lot of data from that. The big finding for me initially was that folks that are living what we call net positive, so that's that total value generated diagram, and I had that circle, said, are you better off because of this interaction? Are you in the green? Or you're worse off because of our interaction because you're just taking a lot of energy out of me? And I'd be in the red. What we're finding is there are net positives everywhere. Now, to me, that's very cool for one specific reason. I've had the opportunity to work in a lot of countries, and my group is, so in 59 different countries, we've been actively working in the last few years. And we're finding them everywhere. But that's not obvious because, for example, in Ghana, working with the Ministry of Economic Development, they had come to Germany, where we're working, to meet with one of the members of parliament and one of the big foundations that gives a lot of money to economic development in Ghana. So tens of millions of dollars, or euros. And when they started talking about how they were going to do it and the next round of monies that were going to go support it and the foundation's expectations for what development looks like, the German style, because we're giving you the money, my colleague happened to be there, invited by the member of parliament, and the minister asked, what are you doing here? Because you don't look like one of these foundation people or politicians. And he said, well, I come from the institute, but I have a different question for you. He said, before you used to be a senator in the Dagar region of Ghana, he said, have you ever met people that are doing something extraordinary? That they have really high engagement, they have really amazing outcomes. He's like, I do. He said, I have met some of those people. I've gotten to meet a lot of people, and I do know some. He said, what if we could find more? Like, oh. He said, what if we could connect them? And he said, which I love, he said, Are you saying that we would do economic development the Ghanaian way, based on people who've already figured out how to do it well within our culture? Yeah. People here have already figured out how to do it really well. You're just not listening to them. You haven't found them. You're not listening to them. You're not finding more, and you're not connecting them. But what if that became your basis? Then, of course, the foundation people start saying, I'm sorry that he interrupted the conversation because obviously our economic development model is the one you should be using if you want our money. I'm sorry that this kid who didn't know what he was talking about started yapping. And he said, that was the first time I've ever heard anything interesting. We do what you say because you give us the money. But maybe there are people in our own country who have already figured this out. So with this survey, we've found people everywhere. So it's not just in the places with a lot of money. It's not just in New York City, not in London, Tokyo, Berlin, but they're everywhere. So why don't we find more of them and learn what they're learning? And that's what I'm going to get to share with you in a few minutes is a couple of folks that live here. So there must be dozens and hundreds of you that are already figuring this out. So how do we find you and learn what you're learning with you and start to connect those dots? And for me, in my ignorance, I call that the Teton Leadership Center. Is to start saying, it's here. We can do something about that towards what Jonathan was sharing. Our field work in 59 countries, describing what it looks like and how to shift those agreements. So working with all these groups that I had listed a bunch of them before, what does it look like in practice, in real organizations, real communities? Again, business, civil society, academics, government, local networks, the very large networks. And what does it look like? And I'll give some data based on, or some findings based on this one large microfinance institution I've been working with for a few years that I told you, where he chartered me, you got to come up with one narrative, one story that connects to our purpose so we can share the results. So right now it's 21,000 employees, 500 offices, which is really cool, 4 million clients. So what that allows us to say is it consistent across your whole bank that they act at this level, or their pockets where they do it really well, pretty good, and not so well. And what does that do to the results that they get, the experiences that they have, and the outcomes that they achieve within the office? But we can also ask the same question, if you remember the total value generated, we can ask the same questions of their clients. What do you value, and how well are you doing in your experience, your engagement, and your outcomes? So we ask them too. So we're starting to find, what does it make a difference? So the culture of leadership matters. And so here we're looking at, as an example, putting people at the center of what you do, caring about human beings as what you're trying to do effectively and efficiently so that it can support it as a business, right? Doing that, the people that care more about that and understand that and have that deeply in who they are and the leadership, that affects their own flourishing. Remember those 4 measures that we had. So people who hold this to be more true, self-report across a lot of them. Remember, so there's thousands of people that we're talking with or interviewing and surveying, report that they are better in their physical, mental, social, and spiritual or moral flourishing also, and their health. Then we said, okay, and the leaders in those 500 offices that more care about this, their employees do too. So it turns out this company is really good at hiring people who really care about these things, and certain offices are really good at getting them to leave. Said, I really care about what you're doing. I'm really mission-driven, and I'm very effective and efficient, so I can get a lot of loans out there with incredible rates for the folks and have all kinds of empowerment, and doing it here is so awful, I'm leaving. So we found those offices, right? So, but the offices where the leaders care about this stuff, their employees also take that culture to be more strong, right? So it builds it up and maintains what they have. And those employees report better flourishing, and they report better outputs. So not only does the culture influence their own experience of flourishing, but they're also getting better outputs as leaders for their whole office, and each of the employees is also getting better. So we're starting to connect the dots. It's not that we do business well or we get good results and we like people. It's the how we do what we do leads to the better results. So we're starting to get evidence by asking them and measuring them, are you better off? Not are you better off than zero, are you better off than your other alternatives? net zero, or net positive because of that. And now we just got the data set in that we're able to show that it also affects the culture of the client group. So these groups are meeting in groups of 25 women who are a microcredit group, and they believe more in themselves the more that the people that are working with them believe in them and support that process. And they also report better flourishing when they have that culture. And they're getting better results. More stability in their home life, better income for their families, better education opportunities for their daughters, all kinds of things. Right? So it's starting to get evidence to show this. So better leadership for flourishing is leading to better total value generated. So this is my last point to end up. 2 big findings. This is my oversimplification of this. But when you start with a no, that experience that we said, this is not what I want to be doing, you have extracted thinking, feeling, willing, everything from me. I need to not be with you people. That kind of no leads to net negative value. Meaning, when we put that total value generated together, when we put in the math of that, when we put in the surveys, when we put in all the measures, people who start from no, this is a gross finding that I'm going to share with you, that we're getting it published, which is shocking, but people who start from no always generate net negative systems. The ecosystem of their stakeholders is net worse off because of that interaction. So they got value from somebody, they sucked it out of you, they charged you high interest rates, whatever, they got the money from you and they gave it to somebody else. So on certain measures, they look really good. But net, the result is net negative. And the shocking thing that we're starting to be able to prove is that if you start from no matter how nice you are with these 2 objectives, we're really good at business, or really good at results, and we try to be nice, no matter how much you do that, you never get the net positive. The second finding that we got is, and we can explain why, so we've got the math and the understanding to start saying why, because you're sucking so much energy out of the system that it's all going to entropy. You're losing all of that value and creativity, disengagement, and the cost and inequalities and inequities of being disengaged are huge, and there's a lot of studies on that. The opposite also, if you start with a yes, and you can stay consistent in your agreements to your yes, that this is what we're trying to do, this is how we're going to interact, this is how we're doing. People that start from that, no matter how much they fall asleep to it and forget, this is just the way we are, but we fall asleep to it. No matter how much they fall asleep to it, we're finding they still generate net positive ecosystems. So even if I'm not doing it consciously, people are better off interacting with us. That's why they continue to interact with us. So if you start with that, yes, you lead to net positive. And you can do this, and there are a lot of people that are doing this. You can join us for what's coming, which is exciting, the Teton Leadership Center. There are a lot of initiatives with the Global Flourishing goals with the UN. Our Leadership for Flourishing book will be coming out in a year from Oxford University Press. A lot of people talking about what this looks like in government, civil society, businesses, on the individual level, team, group level. We're doing a lot of this total value generated of figuring out, looking across a lot of data sets to see how does this hold out. And we also got a report that's coming out on what do those world agreements for flourishing look like across the world. So sharing some of the data, like I said, from it showing up everywhere, and what does that look like. We're also doing, and this is exciting, global flourishing study. The Templeton World Charity Foundations gave us, my colleagues and I at Harvard, a bunch of money to go hire Gallup to go interview 240,000 people every year for 5 years on their sense of flourishing, right, in 22 countries. So that represents about 60 to 70% of the population. So what are the determinants of flourishing? And we're going to have a lot of data around that. And we actually, again, the data set, the first data wave is coming in, and we'll have that December 1st. So there's going to be a lot of data coming out that. For me, in the social sciences, this is like being part of the JPAL or the labs. He said, and we just landed a robot on Mars. The data incoming is amazing. But we can start to say, and anybody that wants to participate in getting access to that data, it's actually available. So anybody can access that data and look at what it looks like in your own country or across countries on different questions. And then work I do at the Center for Work, Health, and Well-Being, what does that look like in the workplace? How does this kind of attitude affect whether people are getting hurt or better off at work, right? And how does that affect their perceptions? So I have a list of questions that you can take with you. Who's loved you into being? Whose flourishing affects your flourishing? What do they value? And so it's asking. He said, well, if you impact my values, if you impact my flourishing, if you've loved me into being, then what do you value in your experience and your outcomes? Just ask them. He said, well, then how are we doing on that? And listen and understand. And you're going to hear some great examples of that now. So this becomes what I call your big yes. Why would you ever give your energy to your no? Sometimes you have to. I'm not telling you to do very dangerous things. But a lot of times we're just unaware that it's like, wait a second, why am I doing this? What I find is in some places where you feel safe doing that, you say, do you like this group? No. Do you like it? I don't either. And the finish, I keep saying that, but the finish is a colleague was a senior executive at Reebok. We were doing this survey. He said, that group is an amazing group. And that's true. The survey showed that. And the results of the whole team. He said, and this group is an awful group. And he looked in the room, he said, but me and you two are the leaders of both of those groups. And like half of you are members of both of those. And we all agree, this group is awful. And we get nothing done. And this group is amazing. And it's our company. So why have we never asked ourselves, why are we doing it this way? Because we actually know how to do it differently. Because we have our own experience where it's great. So it's about your big yes. So I would suggest your yes is your choice. And that's sort of my whole big deal in strategic clarity is, what is your choice? And it's becoming, as Sandy and others mentioned, he said, what are the choices that we have and becoming more aware of them? And I think that's a big focus of the things that we'll be working through tomorrow. And what the Teton Leadership Center is about is let's be more conscious of what some of these choices are, because maybe in those interactions, bless you, and how we choose to be together, we can start finding the solutions to a lot of the things that Jonathan was talking about. There are a lot of people in this room that have a lot of really good ideas and a lot of great experience. So we're not starting from zero. Can we pull this together? What I'd like to do is invite up Fred and Nona, two people in your community, that they can share a bit of